Hello, listener. Just a quick note before you dive into this next episode of the Sacred Leadership Podcast. As you know, we talk a lot in terms of unfiltered truths and raw, honest conversation. As a result, there are some subjects that have a little bit of sensitivity and some content warnings that come along. If you're listening to this and you feel at any point you're uncomfortable or your nervous system feels dysregulated or you're not in a place and space for what it is that you're hearing, it's okay to pause the episode, come back to it at a later time, or maybe never at all. Don't worry. You just need to pay attention and do what feels right for you. If this episode isn't for you, there are plenty of other episodes for you to check out. Thank you for taking good care of yourself, and we appreciate you being here. Getting right back into another episode of the Sacred Leadership Podcast, I have a very dear friend joining me today, Maddie Hunt. Maddie and I were brought together when we were actually working together, and we formed a very quick friendship after sharing a room at a retreat together. We found out that we had a lot in common, and little did we know we would have a lot more in common in the years to come. So it is my absolute honor to be able to bring Maddie to share with all of you. For those of you who don't know Maddie, she's the founder of Her, a virtual assistant and online business management agency for female identifying founders. Maddie entered the workforce just as the global pandemic changed the way we work forever. No one was hiring, but she quickly learned that the back-end operations of small businesses play a huge part in a brand's success, and she savored learning how entrepreneurs' brains work. Thus began the start of her agency. Before long, the agency was the busiest it had ever been, and she lost her brother, TJ. She learned overnight that life is too short not to spend time doing what we love. By working with Maddie's agency, Her, she hopes to empower and enable as many women as possible to do more of what they love with the people they love, while leaving a lasting impact on the communities that matter most to them. Maddie values honesty, loyalty, and humor, and the ocean will always be her home. At Her, they've given women-identifying business owners over 4,500 hours back into their lives in just 3 years, and they are just getting started. Probably the most epic bio that we've had. Matt, really enjoyed that one. So if you need help writing your bios for when interviewed on podcasts, I think Maddie might know a thing or two.
Thank you, Amber. So excited to be here.
Just out of, your own lived experience, right from your words, if you could share a little bit just about the whole behind the scenes of what you alluded to in your bio and kind of how you got started, what that was like for you and where you found yourself today, that would be amazing.
Yeah, so I'll start from the very beginning, and that would be myself in college, just getting to wrap up my undergraduate degree. So I was studying public health at Westchester University, which is a college in Pennsylvania, and I was getting ready to graduate in May. At this time, it was February. I was living in Philly. I was teaching yoga. Commuting to school only like 1 or 2 days a week. And so really just committing to my yoga practice and teaching and beginning this journey of trying to find full-time work as a newly graduated person. And so I started to apply to all sorts of different types of jobs in the public health world, in the yoga world, kind of anything that seemed interesting at the time. And next thing you know, March 2020 rolled around, and we all know what happened March 2020. The world shut down seemingly overnight. And so any application that I had put out for my very first big girl job instantly came back with an email response of, hey, we're no longer hiring because of this pandemic. We don't know what's going on. So please reconsider us in the future if this job is even available at that time, right? Because we have to remember a lot of people were also being laid off during this time frame. And so I all of a sudden was in this period of my life in which the city shut down, yoga studio shut down, so I no longer had work. College was shut down. I moved out of Philly back to New Jersey to my parents' house. So I was now living back with my parents, and I had no job opportunities. And so I was like, what in the world is happening? As everyone was, what in the world is happening? What direction do I go in? And so I had many conversations with both my parents, but mostly my dad, of just trying to figure out what adulthood meant now that like I couldn't follow the typical linear path that most people would be able to prior to COVID. You know, it was college, job, and that's kind of the path. But I didn't really necessarily have that opportunity at the time. So I remember sitting down with my dad in our dining room, and he pulled out this big Post-it note that you see in like meetings. And we just started jotting down everything that I really love to do and everything that I am good at doing, right? So what I enjoy and what I'm good at doing. And one of the things that made it on that list was virtual assistant work, because at the time I was working a couple hours a month for my dear friend Alana, who owned a business, just helping her put together some like designs for her business, some basic admin things, just behind the scenes business work that I had never even really did before working with Alana. And so that was just a small asterisk on the Post-it note. At the end of our conversation, my dad said, well, why don't you try this virtual assistant thing? You know, it's completely remote, completely online. You don't have to go into work anywhere. And so that's really where I began my journey. I started to reach out to clients, cold emailing people saying like, hey, any chance you need a virtual assistant? And I was lucky enough to be able to receive my first clients that way and then just grow incrementally over a period of time. We grew very quickly because of the dedication that we have for our clients and the support that we provide them. And so within a few months, I was able to scale just a solo virtual assistant gig into a full-time virtual assistant and OBM agency. And so that's kind of where the business came from. A long-winded story for how the business began. Now, in my bio, it did mention that my brother TJ had passed away during kind of the midst of that, right? So TJ, which we'll talk about more, passed away in June of 2020. So to go through the time frame again, I started the business of virtual assisting March 2020, scaled upwardly, bringing on team members between April all the way through June. So we scaled upwardly from there. And then June is all of a sudden when my world came crashing down, when my brother died. And we can talk about what that journey looked like. But that is where that event happened in like the period of this entire transition.
Yeah. And Maddie, and I have formed a friendship, and in full transparency, which is one of the things that's really important to me, but also really important in what I share with you all on this podcast. Maddie was the person who really helped hold my hand and walk me through how to navigate life with sudden loss. Both of us lost our loved ones very unexpectedly, very suddenly, and in a way that we were completely in the middle of life, in the middle of living, in the middle of everything. And then all of a sudden, like this huge trauma occurs, this huge tragedy occurs. And for me, there was really like no one. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to still do my job, because with the type of work that Maddie does and the type of work that I do, we're very client facing. So you have to show up and be able to ethically serve and hold space and be in a place where you can do that. And if you're not, you don't get paid. Like that's really what it comes down to. So really trying to figure out, what does that look like? How do I still work? How do I still maintain my integrity and my ethics? But also know that like I'm not okay. And I feel like that's a conversation that we don't really have a lot, whether it is the loss of a loved one or a pet or a miscarriage or any other type of loss that we go through. There's so many of us who are in these very unique positions where we're holding space for other people, and our jobs are solely based on our ability to show up and give our own energy. I had like no resources except for Maddie. And so that was what we really talked about being able to have a conversation around today. And so to be very specific about that, Maddie, you being the one that went first, right? And that's a lot of leadership is about going first. And sometimes we pick it and sometimes we don't. You being the one that went first, what did you learn in those initial months after your loss and running a business and being a leader and being someone who holds space and at that point had a small team?
Yeah. So what I learned in relation to leadership and business ownership was really the practice of grace. Um, I have always been someone that really pushed through for work, whether that be work as in like work for my business or schoolwork or work that you had to do for extracurriculars, growing up. I was always someone that pushed through despite the circumstances, just because that was, well, I thought my innate nature, right? We just continue forward no matter what's going on. I now realize that's more my upbringing than innate nature, but um so as I was processing the loss of my brother, I came face to face with the reality that trauma brings, which is, for me, memory loss. I right after my brother had passed, it happened in such a traumatic way that I actually wasn't able to remember like short-term experiences. So I wasn't able to remember conversations I was having with people. I wasn't able to remember experiences I was having with different communities. And so that was a big part of my journey. Another piece as well was just like energy loss. I was extremely exhausted all the time. My energy levels were to the floor. And then lastly was just like spontaneous bursts of extreme sadness, which comes with loss as well. And so all of those different items really forced me into this period of needing to take a step back from my business, which in hindsight, I can be grateful for, because if it weren't for those physical symptoms, I don't think I would have given myself a break. So to kind of move forward from there, I said that something I learned was to have grace. At first, it was forced, and through taking that break, I was able to learn how to be gentle with myself amidst a very difficult period in my life. I was able to learn how to find purpose outside of the work that I do and find meaning outside of the work that I do, because for the first time in my young adult life, I was actually needing to find who I was as an individual outside of what I contributed in the world. I couldn't contribute a lot at that time, in a way that we kind of define as a society, right, through work. And so I had to figure out, how can I still love who I am and have grace for who I am, despite losing this big sense of my identity. Those would be, that would be like the biggest thing that I learned. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that it's really interesting because the after effects are different for everyone. I actually went into a period of like hyper productivity was
Interesting.
my response. I was in a position where I've always been the one in my family to, get things done, bring people together, smooth things over, help make sure everybody's okay. I think it is a big part of my personality. And again, a big part of what I was just kind of innately taught in my upbringing. And I also had the experience of having gone through really severe chronic illness. And so I knew how to deal with crisis in a sense, and I knew how to like push through. And I also felt this sense of responsibility in terms of everyone had done so much to take care of me when I was really sick. And now I got a chance to take care of other people. For me, in my situation, you lost a sibling, I lost a parent. And so it was kind of taking care of my other parent, my remaining parent. And, we can totally have a whole separate conversation about what's healthy, what's unhealthy. But like when you're in the thick of it, when you are grieving, when you are in that shock afterwards, it really manifests differently for each person. And you were actually the person that was like, hey, like, are you okay? Really, truly, are you okay? How are you doing? Like, how many clients are you seeing? Do you feel like okay to see these clients? And it was actually hard for me to limit myself in a way, because when I was working with my clients, that's when I actually felt good, because I was able to be there and really be worried about somebody else and really focus on what was going on for somebody else's life. And I was not tapped into what I was dealing with during that time, because as a coach, as a therapist, like that wasn't my space. It was about the other person. So I got to take a break. But energetically, we're still holding space for people. We still have to make sure that we have the emotional reserves to do that ethically. And you were the person that really helped me have that conversation with myself. So I think maladaptively, I could have probably seen 6 clients a day and been like, yeah, this is great. But I limited myself to maybe 2, sometimes 3 at the most. And that was even just a couple days a week, which it was hard. It was also hard for me to slow down because that same question of like, if I'm not working, if I'm not doing the thing that I do, who am I? And that was the second time in my life I had really been faced with that, because going through chronic illness, I wasn't able to be functional or really have utility in that way either. And then I was like, whoa, here we are again, having that
same lesson
coming on back. Like, it is so interesting how those things happen for us. And I think being able to just kind of find your way back to slowly reintegrating, that's in a journey that I'm just now fully facing, going into year 2. But like you and I had said when we spoke earlier this week, you're a little bit ahead of me. So how has reintegration been for you?
Yeah, great question. Before I dive into that, I want to be honest too, because like you read in my bio, that's something I value. Although I took time off at some point, my very first reaction was just like yours, Amber.
Wow.
I was hyper productive in the sense of like, I had my hands in all the pots when it came to the funeral planning process, was writing the obituary, designing like the little handout that you give to people. So like was on overdrive there. And then from that kind of crashed. And I think came back to work a little bit too quickly. So although I did take a few weeks, like maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks off, I came back to work really quickly. And it's through that whole experience of having to be back quickly that I was able to provide some insight to you during your experience. Be like, are you sure like you want to do that in like a loving way? But I'm glad that it was helpful for you. So I did want to just be honest in that experience. How has reintegration been? It has been different with each and every year, which I know we had talked about a little bit. So in this phase of my life, it is integrating into year 3. So I've been through year 1, I've been through year 2, both of which bring their unique set of challenges and lessons. Year 3 has been gentler, I would say. Year 3 for me so far has also been more miscellaneous and random in the ways that I experience the grief. Year 1 was consistent. Year 2 was consistent and heavy. And now I feel a little bit more spaciousness between when grief decides to rear its ugly head. And so what that specifically looks like for me is that more days than not, I don't think about the trauma anymore. More days than not, or more weeks than not, I'm not thinking about TJ every single day. You know, it's usually every few days. So there's more spaciousness there, which has helped a little bit too. And then there's more space between when I actually do need to take some time aside to feel the heavy emotions that come with loss. And so now I mostly just will have flashbacks to certain positive or negative memories, positive memories being memories made with my brother while he was still here, negative memories being ones that had happened after we learned that he had passed. And they just pop up based off of triggers that are happening in my life now. And so I think what I have been learning in year 3 is how to go about life and allow myself the space to be with my emotions when these triggers pop up and these random memories flood into my consciousness and trigger a positive or negative response. Whereas before I was really just living in a state of survival day in and day out. So I didn't have to like regulate based off of the week or the day because it was just a steady state of like, we just got to get through, you know? Now it's like, okay, maybe this week we'll have just like a negative flashback, or maybe this week we'll go into a really happy flashback, but it brings me sadness because he's no longer here. So I'm learning how to just navigate that with less warning because, again, it's not happening every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other thing that you and I spoke about is the fact that there is this weird expectation of only getting a year.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. I think that is something that, unfortunately, we as a society have done a really poor job of knowing how to, I'll say, quote unquote, manage people with grief, because I would say that's how our society kind of views it, right? We have to manage these people. We have to learn how to handle them because they have these emotions that remind us of our own mortality. And none of us want to look at our own mortality because as a culture, we're not looking at our own deaths. None of us think that we're going to die tomorrow, right? And so I think in year one, folks oftentimes, I won't say this is always the case, this depends on your community, but folks often receive a lot of support and guidance on how to navigate their grief. And then after year one, I sense this feeling of, when are you gonna get over it? You know? And so there wasn't a lot, when I was looking around, there wasn't a lot of education on how to go about living your life in year two when society kind of expects you to be back to normal again. When you feel the exact opposite of normal, you feel as though you've been left behind, you feel as though you've been kicked out of the tribe, because at least for me, year two was worse than year one, but now I didn't have the support. And so I think what we can do better as a society, and hopefully what we can bring to light in this conversation, is like, how can we actually support the people that we love after they've lost someone or something that meant the world to them beyond just what the typical societal timeline is? You know, how can we still show up for the people we love in the way that they need year 2, year 3, year 4, year 20, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it really doesn't go away.
No.
The whole time heals thing, we've talked about this, where it's like time changes, time shifts. You learn different ways to live around this thing. It's not like the thing itself gets any smaller. You just find ways to live with and around it. And I do feel grateful that I have you to have these conversations with, because year two has definitely, we're, just basically a month and a half into year two for me. And it has definitely been the harder of my experience so far. Much to your point, year one was a lot of survival, and survival protects you in a weird way from the depth of your emotions. It really numbs you a little bit, and you're so focused on just getting from one day to the next that there's not much room for much else. And then year two, it's kind of this expectation to start living again. Mm-hmm. Except now you're living without this person who was big part of your whole life. And I think for me, that's been the weird thing, where I feel this pressure between, okay, like that happened last year, so like let's, move forward with all the stuff that you're doing in your business and all the stuff that you're, doing in your life, and actually really having the gravity of reality set in. Just the past couple weeks, I find that I get through my weeks okay, and then I'm pretty much in a ball crying Friday night into Saturday morning, like every single week. I'm realizing, like, okay, so this is all like bits and pieces that I save up during the week. And then it comes out when I have space. And so to talk a little bit more about what you were going into about making space, what does that look like for you now, having had this as part of your lived experience for a little bit longer than I have?
So I would say making space right now is really trying to pursue things that bring meaning and joy into my life in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming. So I feel as though now my energy levels are just now getting back to kind of normal. And so I have more energy to actually go out and like be in community with people. Whereas year one and year two, I really just didn't even have it in me to be out with a group of friends for an elongated period of time. And so, funny enough, making space actually looks like carving out periods of time in my schedule to do more that I love as long as it feels right in my body and in my heart. And so, I know something that we had talked a little bit about is that I have struggled since losing my brother with balancing. I really want to do all these amazing things in my life that bring me joy while still at the same time not like having that drive supersede everything else in my life. And so a beautiful term that you put to it was like existential dread almost is like now that I know that someone close to me died on a whim, it has highlighted to me my mortality more so than ever. And so every day I feel as though I have to treat like my last day. Like I too could die at the end of today. And if that were the case, would I be happy with how I've spent my life today? And so that brings a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. And so I think when I'm creating space to go do things that bring me joy, when I check in with my heart and my body and like actually do so from a grounded place, that feels spacious. Whereas when I'm trying to fill up my schedule with things that bring me quote unquote joy, but it's coming from this place that's driven by stress, pressure, and anxiety from this existential dread, it's counterintuitive to spaciousness.
Yeah. And it was existential perfectionism.
Perfectionism, yeah.
Yeah, that was the word that we talked about because
Thank you.
With Maddie and I was like, existential dread is a thing, but I didn't make up that term at all. When Maddie and I were kind of having a check-in with each other earlier this week, I shared with Maddie that the thing that's really been keeping me up at night, yes, there's grief and sadness, and I find myself thinking about my dad a lot and not wanting to forget him. So I try really hard to remember him. And obviously the more I put into remembering the details of him, the more sad I feel like I am because I know that I'm never going to, experience his hugs or hear his laugh. And so that's part of it. And the other part of it is this, we're going to coin it like existential perfectionism, where there is this pressure where like, for me, in my story, my dad lived a very normal day. Like I was staying with my parents at the time that my dad died, and I heard him come up and he got ready for bed and he did all of his normal stuff and he went to sleep and he didn't wake up. Like that is what happened. He had walked the dogs. He had made spaghetti and meatballs for dinner. Like, oh my gosh, I miss my dad's spaghetti meatballs so much. He's so good at spaghetti meatballs. His meatballs, the best. But
chef's kiss.
Right? Like, but it was like a normal, regular day. And we actually had plans like that next day to do things. I was tired and I didn't go and say goodnight to him because I was tired. And I was like, oh, well, I'll see him tomorrow. I'll spend time with him tomorrow. And then he didn't wake up. And now, as a result of that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I could not wake up, or something could happen to me, or something could happen to the people that I love. And yes, like this is a reality that we all live with every day, but we're not aware of it because it's not part of our lived experience. And then when it becomes a part of our lived experience, it becomes so real to us. It becomes this thing that for me and for you, I'm sure other people can relate to this. It becomes really hard not to fixate on the fact that like we're operating on borrowed time. We're operating in this very limited capacity.
Yeah.
And so I'm now like not thinking like, oh, I have 100 years to like get all this stuff down. Now I'm thinking like, okay, like I want to get tattoos. I need to have gotten these tattoos yesterday because if I'm laying in a coffin, like I want those tattoos on my body. I need to like create my legacy. I have to get this damn podcast going. Like all of these things that I'm now like, do it. But then I'm overextending myself and I'm not creating space for me to really be present and really be in the grief that's coming with year two, which is resulting in a lack of sleep in the evenings, which makes everything so much harder and that much more emotional.
Yeah.
And you were saying that you can definitely relate.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, so for me, I didn't know this was not normal, but we have had a conversation about this. Ever since I was little, I just like thought and knew, not in like a way that would freak me out, but just like my body was like, yep, that's it. Like I was going to die young. Like just like knew it for sure that my life was going to be shorter than most people. And so growing up, like even all the way through until TJ died, I would never say that I was like scared of death or like never would say that I was ruled or my life was ruled by that idea of death, but just like had this sense of knowing and peace surrounding that knowing that like my time is limited here. So I've always had this sense of like trying to be more purposeful and intentional with my time, but it was in a way that was more level because again, it was like this inner knowing that brought me kind of peace, as weird as that sounds. And then TJ died and you've even said this to me before, like maybe that message wasn't for me, it was for him. Like I was not the one to go early, it was him. Potentially, no one knows the plan. But this used to be steady, like feeling of, okay, like my time is ending, let's be intentional, like skyrocketed into let's make the most of every single freaking minute. And so with that comes burnout. And that only exacerbates the grief too, like you were saying. So when you're exhausted mentally, physically, and emotionally one day, it circles back around and kicks you in the butt worse the next day when grief comes knocking on the door. And that was definitely my experience, like every single day, year two. And year three, it has shown up a lot, but through conversations with you and just through like now being used to it a little bit more, I'm starting to learn how not to let that voice in the back of my head saying do more, or like your life is useless, kind of drown out in the background, not rule everything that I'm doing and everything that I'm like pouring my energy into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's an interesting lesson hearing you say that, because I'm sitting here really feeling very faced with the fact that one of my takeaways, if we can call it that, from losing my dad was that there are things that are more important than work. There are things that are more important than making money. There are things that are more important than posting content on social media. And yes, obviously I know these things. And this is something I've only shared with a handful of people because it is a very difficult thing that I'm still processing through. But the night that my dad died, my fiance and I were staying with my parents. We were there for the holidays. My dad died very early in the morning on New Year's Eve, 2021 into 2022. And my dad had made spaghetti and meatballs for dinner. And I had a chance to see a client, like literally right at dinner time. I think it was like a 6 o'clock client. And it was a last minute session and the holidays were coming up. So, you know, you're not going to be working a lot as a therapist around the holidays. People don't schedule. And I saw an opportunity to make a little bit more money before the dry season of the holidays. And my dad was always so, do what you need to do, honey. Like, you know, go make money, go see your client. Like I'll leave something out for you on the stove. And he did. But I did not have dinner with my dad. I did not have that last dinner that I could have had with him because I chose to see a client. And do I think that I made the wrong decision? No, I'm not going to beat myself up for it because I didn't know what I know now. But looking back on it, do I wish that I had eaten dinner with my dad. Yeah, absolutely I do. And I'm forever going to be missing the fact that I could have had that one last dinner with him and I chose to work instead. And so it's very interesting to me that I'm now faced with this crossroads of feeling like I have this pressure to do all of these things, but also simultaneously slow down and be really present.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been very hard to navigate. It almost feels like it's going to break my little human brain. It's just, it doesn't all make sense. And I'm trying to make something make sense that I feel like I'm incapable of making sense of.
Yeah, like it doesn't compute. I have that same dichotomy going on of like, I want to, like, if I could spend time with all of my favorite people all at the same time, because like, I would like love to. Like, I want to do all the things, but I want to do them intentionally because otherwise, what's the point? Like I want to be like fully steeped in the conversation. I want to be like fully integrated into whatever experience that I'm having because that's where the meaningful moments and memories are made. But our brain doesn't really like compute both at the same time. You know, it's like so hard to, for me at least, to hold both. And so it's interesting to hear different people talk about like their grief experiences and their stories surrounding loss because I had a somewhat similar experience to you with your dad and not having dinner with him, his last dinner with him. A few days before TJ had died, he was living at his first ever apartment outside of like college in Delaware for the internship that he was at the time that summer. And I was going up to visit some friends at college in Pennsylvania. And so I was going to call TJ on my way up to see if I could stop at his apartment on the way back and maybe we could grab dinner. But it was like 30 minutes out of the way. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to see him probably in a couple weeks anyway. Let me just like push it off and we'll catch up some other time. Well, whatever. I'll see him soon. And literally a few days later, he got in an accident on his internship. And I look back at that same exact moment. I'm like kicking myself so hard because I didn't take the time to drive a little bit out of the way to spend time with him. Now, would he have been available to hang out? I don't know, but our brains like constantly wrap us back to those moments and constantly have us reassess all the tiny pieces leading up to the tragedy and the trauma and walking us through like what we could have done different to, for a lot of people, it's like, how could I have changed the circumstance so this wouldn't have happened to the person? Or B, how could I have changed my action to be able to have more meaningful, intentional time with this person before they left without me being able to say goodbye or left before I was able to really show them how much I like loved and cared for them. And so I feel way more at peace about that now, but year one and year two, it was a lot of like me coming to terms with TJ knew how much I loved him. He knew how much I cherished him. He knew how much I appreciated him. And now that I know what it feels like to lose someone without having a formal goodbye and to feel still somewhat in my gut that I didn't wrap things up how I wanted to, right? I didn't get that last moment. I am way more present with the people in my life now. I know something that you and I had talked about, something that has happened in my life as a result of the trauma is like I'm hyper fixated on goodbyes with people. And so when my partner leaves for work, like I always like close my eyes and try to remember exactly what I said and exactly what I did and always say like, I love you. Same thing, like anytime I leave my parents, if they come visit, I always like try to hold on to like, okay, I said I love you. I gave them a hug. So that way, God forbid anything happens to them, I could at least like rest at the end of the day knowing I like had that good, solid goodbye. And so that has been one trauma response that has come out of it. But I think it's important to talk about this and normalize that these thought processes happen because before my conversation with you, no one had been open enough about grief with me. Even like my parents and my brother who went through a similar experience as me, they never talked about it. And so I had all of these thoughts and these like habits that I now have as a result of loss that I thought were unnormal that I thought were wrong, that I thought made me like a person that was like sick and needed help. And that's really not the case. It was more so this is a natural response to a horrible thing happening. And it's a shared experience amongst lots of people with grief, but not many people talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do think that, again, there's this expectation that after year one, you're moving on kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's a lot of why people do keep things to themselves that happen year 2, year 3, year 4, and beyond, because there's this shame associated with still living in relationship to the grief. But as we said, earlier in this conversation, never goes away. It might shift, it might change, but what it is and the size of it and the weight of it never, ever, ever goes away. And I know that just being a small business owner, being an entrepreneur, I was used to my mind always being active, always thinking about, oh, okay, like, could I make that into content? Like, how could I, sell this offer? Is there a different way that I can add hashtags to my Psychology Today profile so that I can get better SEO and get more clients? Like, always, always, always having my brain just being preoccupied, because that was part of my chosen profession in terms of being responsible for my own income. So I was kind of used to that. And now I have this other thing running in the background that takes up a lot of energy and a lot of space and a lot of emotion. And I'm really realizing that I need to be able to give it as much space as it needs. And I can't tell it to be smaller, because I'd prefer to focus on the things that I normally focus on, like planning content strategy and, branding colors and whatever the heck else, I got on my to-do list for that time. And this is where I feel like this conversation is a little bit unique for you and I. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to this episode, because of being responsible for our own income and maybe not feeling like there is an option to take the time and space to fully grieve. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. So my first realization of this happened, I would say, late summer of 2020. So I came back to work too early, as I had mentioned, and then quickly kind of burnt out because I was trying to maintain my same workload while like having still very minimal energy and at that time very minimal memory skills. So like delivery also wasn't the best, right? And so at that point, I really had to learn how to lean on my pre-existing team and ask for help. I had to learn how to say like, okay, I am responsible for my own income. And if I need to, if I'm going to make any money for myself and like sustain any living at this point in this pre-existing business model, I need to invite in support where necessary for us to continue to thrive as a business. Because if I don't, and I just remove myself and let things crumble to the ground, I'm going to be completely helpless. So I think that for me, a big part of my healing journey has been delegation in multiple different areas of my life. But in talking specifically about business ownership, learning how to let go of the reins of specific areas of my business that I thought that only I could do, and reconfiguring my business model, reconfiguring the way that I show up in my work life. So that way I could tend to what needed to be heard within my heart and within my emotional self at that time. And this has continued to be a practice for me, even now through year 3. I've gone through multiple iterations of like how I've decided to show up as a business in support of other people, and multiple iterations of how I've decided to have team members support me based off of where I have been at, mostly in my grief journey, because at different periods of time, I need to have different levels of support. And I think that if there are business owners out there or freelancers out there, people that work for themselves out there listening, who are grieving something right now or going through a difficult period of their life that requires them to have more spaciousness to tend to their own heart, I would highly consider you reaching out to someone, anyone, to support you in the work that you do, even if you think it's not possible for someone to take over some of the nitty-gritty behind the scenes tasks that you do. I've had so many conversations with business owners who have been in all different phases of their life. Motherhood is a big one. As beautiful as motherhood is, it also could be difficult for a lot of people because of the change it brings to your life and the change it brings to your physical body and the energy levels that you may have. And so I've talked to so many different mothers and people saying that they didn't think that they'd be able to outsource A, B, or C until actually being in conversation with us. And were able to experience so much levity in their life post outsourcing because they took the risk and they took the leap to have the conversation. And so I really encourage anyone listening to be brave in asking for what they need and what they want, and have faith in what they believe is possible for themselves and their business when it comes to being able to find a rhythm and a balance between your personal life and tending to your grief or loss or whatever you may be dealing with, while also still being able to run a sustainable and ethical business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that is something that you and I have had very transparent conversations around as well, because for me, I probably wouldn't have a business right now if I hadn't brought on support basically right around the time that that my dad died. It really, truly, I'm very, very thankful for my support, because we wouldn't even be recording this podcast right now. I can tell you that, because having that person there who is using their executive functioning skills when mine may have been limited, to very lovingly and compassionately, right? And this is the other thing, is if you're hiring help, make sure that help feels good and supportive to you. Hiring an OBM or a VA or, outsourcing, that's not somebody that's, hey, like, you need to make sure that you're getting this stuff done for me, or I can't do my job. Like, yes, there's communication. Yes, there's expectations. Yes, we need to be very explicit and transparent about what the transactional deliverables are. However, there are people out there in, Maddie's capacity who are able to do that work and do it very lovingly. I know my OBM, who will literally be listening to this episode and helping to edit it, Aaron Beavers, shout out, love you, has the very gentle hand holder this whole time that's very like, hey, how much energy do you have this week? Do you think you can get this done? Okay. Do we need to push out the due date for this? But without it, I would have drowned. I would have given up. I absolutely, without a doubt, would not have a business to come back to. It is also important to note that I made that decision because I wanted to be able to have a business to come back to, and hiring support for me, it was kind of a break even this past year, to be completely honest.
Been there.
Yeah.
Been there.
I am in a position of privilege where I have a partner who has a very steady income, has a salary position, is able to pick up some of the slack to support our household. While I'm not having as much of a income generating business going on over here. So I do want to highlight that I know that that's not an option for everyone. I am in a position of privilege to be able to make those decisions, so that even though I was basically working for my support, so I would have a business to come back to when I was ready,
yep.
I was able to do that. But I also hired a high level support because I was planning on having a pretty substantial business to come back to. But what Maddie was saying is there's all sorts of levels of support, and all of those different levels of support come with all different types of contracts and price tags.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to mention too, because I have also been in a position of privilege in being able to afford the support. But for people listening that might say I absolutely cannot afford to do so, and you've gone through the numbers, because there are people that say that and never actually, they don't have a good relationship with their finances in their business, right? And so you don't know what's actually coming in. So first, go through and actually see like, oh, maybe I do have a few extra $100, like have someone help. That's the first thing. But if you do that and you're like, I just don't have any extra to spare, there are so many different arrangements that you can have for free, right? So there might be a huge cheerleader of your business, someone that really supports your work and loves the content that you create, that would jump at the opportunity to learn from you and support you in an energy exchange. So see if there's any way that maybe you could do like a work trade or like an energy exchange. Maybe someone comes in a couple hours a month to help you with writing captions for Instagram in exchange for, let's say you're a massage therapist, in exchange for like a free massage every month. So if you don't have financial resources, you have resources in other ways in which you might be able to receive the support that you deserve and that you need. So sometimes we just have to be a little bit creative in how we structure that.
I actually really love that you highlight that, because one of the other ways that I've also been able to leverage support this year is I have a really good friend who has a pretty well-known Instagram account. Marissa is over at Little Bent Up Broken, but a lot of people also don't know that Marissa is a pretty amazing powerhouse when it comes to creative consultation, Canva, like all that kind of stuff. And her and I have been able to do a trade. So that's been a way that I've been able to outsource, because what takes her like 2 minutes on Canva, or would probably take Maddie 2 minutes on Canva, be there clicking around for like 2 hours, because that is not my zone of genius. So that's where like I would reach out to, Maddie or Marissa or something like that and be like, hey, like, what do I have, that I can offer you? And I think also, making sure that even if that's not maybe the direct way that you can have an energy exchange, maybe there is actually like you get a massage twice a month, right? And maybe you're actually able to barter with your massage therapist. So you're getting that. And then the money that you were paying for your massage, you can put towards hiring help for your business. Like,
yeah.
Get creative.
Yeah, I love that too. And something I just want to circle back on, I didn't realize I didn't touch on that you had mentioned, is like finding the right support. And I think that's especially key when you are someone that is grieving or moving through an especially difficult period of your life. I would encourage anyone that is seeking out support during that time frame to be explicitly honest and vulnerable with the people that you're interviewing, to say, hey, I'm going through this. You don't have to share your whole life story, of course, but like just letting people know where you're at in your life. So that way that person can decide like if they have the extra energy to bring to the table to be able to like make up in ways that you're not able to show up, or they're able to hold the space for you in the way that you need, because there are all different types of service providers out there. Some come in and just are like check it off the list type of people, very type A. And some other people have like a better skill set to be able to have more emotional conversations and to be able to be your cheerleader when you're going through times in which you might need someone like really supporting you and cheering you on. So everyone has that slightly different skill set. So just make sure that you're being honest and asking if that's something that they're able and willing to like support you in. Your journey with grief, your journey with loss, knowing that you will always be able to show up at 100% like maybe some of their other clients.
Yeah. And that really takes me to a point that I think is important to make about ethical leadership, because when we are hiring, we are responsible for the people that we're hiring. And so that doesn't mean that you're being transparent with somebody about like, hey, this is, where I'm at in my life. And then you get to like go and trauma dump all over your VA because, you're having a rough week and they happen to be the person that like has to check in with you, once a week. Like if you find that you're like, your VA is the person that you're like processing your grief with, like maybe that's the time to go get a therapist. Maybe that's the time to go get a death doula or a coach, right? There's lots of other different types of support out there. So that consent absolutely does go both ways. And so when you're making sure that somebody is able to hold space for you and they have the capacity, right? We're not basically saying like, hey, you're my VA/therapist now because you signed off on this. No. It's just them saying, yes, I have the capacity to be trauma sensitive to where you're at in life. But that does not then obligate them to hold your hand and walk you through and process your grief. Like that is not ethical leadership whatsoever. And I know that all of us have seen service provider relationships where the person that has hired the service provider has very poor boundaries, has very blurred boundaries. They're going through a time. And then because the service provider is contracted to help them, the service provider then maybe takes on more than ethically it is their responsibility to take on, because they're trying to get around all the other stuff so that they can do their job.
Yeah.
And I think that, level of consent and also self-leadership and ownership of what is appropriate in those exchanges is important to highlight as well.
Yeah, I love that you highlight that. And to like give a practical example too, what this has looked like for myself and my team, and this will look differently for everyone, but I think it's helpful to kind of walk through an example, is my team knows that I have lost my brother, right? And so that's just like an underlying like theme in kind of our work as an agency. It's really in our brand messaging. So they know that. And they also know that I never come to the table and say like, blah, 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 this is happening today. And I'm just like, so going through it, I'm like never like crying on a call and just dumping everything on them. But they also know that there will be times in which I cancel a team meeting because I just need some extra space that day. Or they know that I'll take off on like the death anniversary and my brother's birthday each year, right? So they're able to hold space for that, and we don't need to have an extensive emotional conversation about it. I think that's where the self-leadership and ownership comes into place, right? Like I know that I need extra space on these days. I know if I'm feeling to this extreme on this random Monday that I'm not in a good place to show up for my team or my clients, and I need to communicate that. My expectation as the business owner, as the leader of the team, isn't, since I'm not in a good place, you must now hold it. I must hold it, but I need to create the space and the boundaries for myself to be able to hold it with grace, rather than like hold it with destruction and just bury it down until it boils over for another day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, really that ties into a lot of doing your own work and being able to emotionally regulate, check in with yourself, actually know how you're feeling. Because I feel like that's a big thing that a lot of us come up against, where like we weren't actually taught how to like check in with ourselves and like really know how we're feeling. And that is absolutely something I have really been learning how to do, existing in relationship to such heavy grief, and to be willing to be honest with myself about how I'm feeling. It's not like, oh, okay, I'm sad, so what? It's like, okay, I'm sad. This is present. Like what level is this sadness? Is this kind of something that I need to cancel my clients today because I'm going to be preoccupied and I can't really be present? Or is this kind of like little light sadness where I want to make sure that, I tell my partner I need some time by myself at the end of the day to, process or cry or whatever it is that I need to do. I think being able to check in honestly, and then take ownership of what you need and then communicate those needs, that really, to me, is ethical leadership. And that's something you feel like you're struggling with. That's where I really would recommend, a coach, a therapist, somebody like that who can really help you to process through that. So you are being a good leader to the support that you've hired to help you through whatever it is that you're navigating, because again, absolutely goes both ways.
Something that one of my therapists gave to me at one point when I was like really processing different like parts of my grief was an emotion wheel, I think it's called. When she first mentioned it on the call, I'm like, okay, back to preschool we go, I guess. But it's funny, she gave me the wheel and I'm like, holy shit, like they should have given us this in preschool, because I didn't even know the words to put like to all these different emotions, right? So like on the inside of the wheel, it's the words that we typically use. It's like sad, angry, happy, right? But I often find myself using those words to describe how I feel, but it really doesn't like touch what I'm actually feeling. And so as you get farther out on the wheel, it gives you more specific words that like touch on different ranges of that same kind of emotion. And so that wheel kind of exercise has really allowed me to say like, okay, well, anger is not exactly it, but X or Y is. And now that I'm able to name it, I'm actually able to like feel into it, lean into it and release it because I actually was able to identify exactly to a T what was going on inside because angry wasn't really covering the job. Right. And I spent more time like trying to dive in and figure out what it was. And so I'd recommend looking at an emotion wheel.
And you know what, y'all? I am going to link an emotion wheel in the show notes so you guys can all see what it is that we're talking about, because as a therapist, it is a really helpful tool. And I think that, just so you can have a visual of what Maddie's talking about and maybe utilize it a little bit for yourself. That is a really, really helpful one. So speaking about help and being helpful, if you are looking for trauma sensitive agency to work with, Maddie does know one. Do you want to tell us about that, Maddie?
Yeah. So my agency is called Her, and we are a virtual assistant and online business management agency. And we would love to support anyone that may be listening that is feeling really called to bring in support that understand or takes the time to understand them and their business so it feels truly nourishing at the end of the day. And like your investment is worth it, not just like, hey, I'm putting out content, I'm getting an ROI with like these sales, but also it feels deeply nourishing as a human and as an individual. So we currently have a few VA and OBM spots available for the rest of Q1 going into Q2. If anyone is interested in one of those spots and just wants to learn a little bit more about the specific work that we do and the specific tasks that we take off of our founders' plates, they can go to our website, which is www.hireher.biz. And Amber, I know you'll put that in the show notes too.
Absolutely will.
And we have all of our information there. And you can also see all of the lovely women on our team and watch their intro videos so you can know exactly who you'd be working with. If you want to talk specifically with me, you can always send me a voice note on Instagram. And our Instagram handle is @hireher.biz as well. Or you can fill out our interest form on our website, and then I'll send you a link to book a call, and we can chat about what type of support would be the best for you, so you could show up the best version of yourself for your business and for your personal life.
Thank you so much, Maddie. And, for anyone who's listening, it is so important to me that the people that I have on this show are people that I know personally are ethical, are, in alignment, are practicing in integrity. So I give wholehearted endorsement for Maddie and her team, because really are very, very, very compassionate, very productive, and very useful service providers. So thank you for offering that for all of us to be able to take advantage of.
Of course. Thank you. And last thing I'll mention too, because I know we mentioned finances being a big piece of kind of the puzzle here. We just launched a whole free marketplace on our website with, I think, like
free resources, you say.
5 or 6 different resources, some of which being like templates for content. So if that would be of support to you and you're not in a position to invest in our VA or OBM services, definitely recommend that you take advantage of that. So that way, at least a little bit of your time can be put back into your day and you're not having to put all of it into your content.
That's amazing. I love accessibility, and I love that you guys offer that as well. Thank you so much for this conversation, Maddie. Thank you for your honesty, your openness, your vulnerability, all of your practical tips as well. And I'm sure that we'll be having you back to talk more about all of these things. And I appreciate your time today.
Oh, I love you. Thank you so much for having me. It has been so much fun to talk about grief in a way that I feel as though not a lot of people are willing to. So thank you for allowing the space for that and for doing what you're doing with this podcast. I know you're helping so many people. So thank you.